Well, time to upload that new Versus. And there we go. Now we wait for 2 weeks. Grandma's internet. What to do?
Please make sure that you are...
Alright, it has been 15 seconds. You know, I gotta find a way to upload more frequently. I think I got an idea. Welcome to Versus Mini, a miniature version of my series Versus. Basically, in my regular Versus, I talk about 5 or 6 different categories when comparing games, but this series will be more focused on 1 or 2, basically whichever categories I think are most important for the games that are being discussed. I also get a lot of Versus requests, and this series will let me work on some of those Versus that I don't want to dedicate a whole 30 minutes to. Today's video is Conker's Bad Fur Day versus Super Mario 64. Let's get into it. These games are very similar in that they have simple controls. You see, Mario can run, jump, and punch things, while Conker can run, jump, and smack things with a frying pan. It is a little bit more complicated than that, of course, but that is the basic structure of the controls. And one thing that I really want to discuss is how these two games' level design utilize the controls. More specifically, how Conker's level design utilize the controls. First though, Mario 64. Mario 64 does this pretty well, but you know, camera and the occasional movement hiccup are problems that can't be ignored. Super Mario 64 is a straight up platformer. A lot of the game is beaten by performing well executed jumps. Anytime that the game requires the player to solve puzzles with punches and such, the game sort of slows to a crawl, and its imperfections really start to show. But when the game is a platformer, it truly excels. For example, the first few stages are very well crafted around Mario's jumps, and the Bowser levels, which I'd argue are the most fun levels, are built almost entirely around careful platforming. I know this sounds kind of ridiculous though. What game wouldn't design its levels around its controls or vice versa? Of course Super Mario 64 does this, but Conker's Bad Fur Day. Now, let me be real quick and real clear before you rush to that dislike button, which is technically engagement, which technically helps my channel anyways, but that's not the point. I am not saying that Conker's Bad Fur Day is a bad game. I am not saying that Conker's Bad Fur Day is an unenjoyable experience. What I'm saying is that from a design standpoint, Conkers does not blend its basic controls and level design very well. Is this a bad thing? Not necessarily, but I do think that it is problematic. Real quick, let's take the moments that you just platform on Conkers, like in the beginning. This is just from personal experience, but I have never seen anyone get through this part with ease on their first go. As far as I've seen and heard, when most people play this beginning platform-like segment for the first time, they find it challenging. And it's one of the first things you do in the game. Then, close to the end of the game, there is a segment where you have to jump and maneuver through lasers. It's near the end of the game, so the fact that it's hard is reasonable. But buck bumble, this is mind-numbingly hard, and it's because this game requires a lot of precision. But the camera doesn't always want to work with you, it's hard to truly tell where platforms and such can be, and the controls aren't nearly as tight as the design is asking it to be. What about the parts where you use the frying pan? Mario 64 has random enemies all over the place, and they can be ignored for the most part. I just defeat enemies for the purpose of healing some health or collecting coins. Conkers, on the other hand, uses the frying pan for puzzles, sort of. Like collecting all the cheese or finding and collecting the gears. It's not used very frequently though, which is fine, but as far as I was concerned when I first played, it seemed like a useless feature to have in the game. And then outside of the basic controls, Conkers utilizes a lot of context-sensitive areas, which keeps the game ever-changing, but I've always considered context-sensitive events and such sort of lazy game design. Albeit, context-sensitive controls definitely fit the tone of Conker, but when the game has to utilize a one-time ability rather than something that Conker has continuously in the game, it seems off. I'd be okay with the context-sensitive portions and consistently changing controls if they built on each other, which in some cases, they do. But I find in most cases, they don't. In the Pooh area of the game, you gotta blast these bugs with a slingshot, and this same method returns, sort of, when fighting the Great Mighty Pooh. In the zombie area, you get a shotgun, and while in the war area, you're given dual machine guns. That good. That real good. But the bowl, the lava race, the matrix portion, and even the last area of the game are all independent control schemes. The last area, that's a bit ridiculous if you ask me. Super Mario 64 establishes a control scheme immediately with additional power-ups that come up a few times, and the entire game is designed around the one control scheme, while Conkers establishes a control scheme, and then another, then another, then another, then another throughout the game. This creates an inconsistent game. This also means that Conkers is unpredictable, and while I genuinely hate using this term to argue for quality, fun piece of media. Everything in Super Mario 64 is designed around jumping, punching, swimming, etc. And one thing that I really like in games is a control scheme that is set at the beginning and continues. It takes a truly creative and truly skilled developer to go, he can jump and punch, let's create 120 stars, and then, for the most part, succeed. There are 3 Toad Stars after all. Lazy boys. Another style that I like is something like Mega Man, which has a base control scheme that is later built upon. This is very common in video games, but worth mentioning. Conker's Bad Fur Day is like playing a bunch of mini games, but with a story. A lot of good mini games, except for the rock solid portion. This part is the video game equivalent of drinking orange juice after brushing your teeth, and if you say that doesn't bother you, then you're lying and should be ashamed. I get the sense from Conkers that Rare had a bunch of other video game concepts, but not full ideas, so they chucked all these into Conkers. In some ways, I think it's sloppy. But how does this style of controls and level design help Conker's Bad Fur Day? You see, it's not a negative video. Maybe. This style design is always engaging, and it helps the narrative. Conkers is driven by story, so its design reflects that. Conkers is parody on top of parody, and there's an ever-changing array of scenes in the game. A Clockwork Orange, Saving Private Ryan, The Matrix, and even Alien. Oh, spoilers by the way. I don't think Conkers could make those parodies work with a frying pan, so the changing scenes and changing control schemes are necessary. Also, with how fluid this game is, I think it could have ran a risk of being too fluid, if that makes sense. If nothing changed, then the experience could get stale. Conkers is a relatively short game, so it really needs the ever-changing design to pack in as much as it can in the short time that you'll play. Super Mario 64 has 120 stars, so it packs a lot in the game, and you'll usually spend a long time playing unless you're really good, like Matt. Conkers is supposed to feel like one day, and if it had too many levels, then it wouldn't feel like one day. Short game with various styles of playing and situations creates that feeling of a full game. Conkers' design is incredibly smart for doing this. But what's my point here? Are Conker's controls and design good or bad? I'm not going to get anywhere by saying this, but I'll go ahead and say both. The design isn't anything to really write home about if you pack it all into a bubble. That said, as previously mentioned, the ever-changing controls and design help to keep the game engaging, and I definitely think it's smart. But I think it's smart because by doing this, it's hiding potentially lackluster or even bad design. So I think that at the end of the day, I'm gonna have to say that the way that Conkers mixed its controls and design is smart, but incredibly inconsistent and at times bad. Alright, we're doing a conclusion. I just decided this. I'm not sure if I'll always have a conclusion, but I think people would want one for this particular matchup. Conkers versus Mario 64. Both are 2 of the most memorable N64 games, and for different reasons. Super Mario 64 is memorable for its revolutionary design and its dive into 3D. Conkers is memorable because it has a singing piece of poo. If you were to ask me which game I like more, I'd say Super Mario 64 for nostalgic reasons. If you were to ask me which game I think is better, well, Super Mario 64. I don't think Conkers is a bad game, but I think that objectively from a design perspective, it is the weakest of the Rare 3D platformers. And when it comes to controls and level design, it doesn't really come close to Super Mario 64. In many people's eyes, it may outshine Super Mario 64 from an enjoyment or memorable perspective, and that's fine. It also does its story and sound much better. But I think as an overall game, Super Mario 64 takes it. Like I mentioned, the fact that Super Mario 64 was able to squeeze out 120 stars and so much design just out of running and jumping is commendable, and one reason why I think the game holds up to a degree. But this is just how I like my games, and why I think Mario 64 works more as a game. I said bad things about Conker's Bad Fur Day. Again. Conker's Bad Fur Day versus Super Mario 64. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Until then, I'm gonna wait for that next Versus to upload, which will be another 3 to 5 months. Thanks for watching this video. Something new, so I hope you enjoyed it. This was actually edited by my good friend Indie Butterknife, who I hope to bring on permanently to edit Versus Mini. A huge thank you for doing this because it allows me to work on my other stuff. Go check them out. If you need more FreeXax though, I'll leave links here for my Banjo-Kazooie vs Super Mario 64 video or my Conker's Bad Fur Day review. Check them out. Once again, thanks for watching.